We come to you live from the Nasrec Center in Johannesburg, where we bring you the 55th ANC National Conference. And this morning we talk about media coverage of the conference, especially the road leading up to the conference. Joining us, you're watching Media and Society, and once again we continue as the SABC News, bringing you live coverage of the 55th National Conference of the African National Congress. And we wake up to what has really been a roller coaster night, with the ANC making it to bed just before 3 a.m. last night, the party going on last night up until about 2:30, where they then put forward their nominations that will be contesting for the top 7 positions, no longer the top 6 of the ANC, since they have also added the role of a second Deputy Secretary General. Let's go through just some of those nominations that came up, just so we can catch you up with who are the front runners at this elective conference this morning. Nominations for President Cyril Ramaphosa as well as Zweli Mkhize, they're vying for the top job. For the nominations for Deputy President, Ronald Lamola, Oscar Mabuyane and Paul Mashatile. Those between those three, or amongst those three, one of them will certainly be the next Deputy President of the party. Nominations for Chairperson, Gwede Mantashe is still running for that position. He's up against David Masondo as well as Stanley Matabata. Nominations for Secretary General are Dumiseni Ntuli, Pumulo Maswale, as well as Figile Mbalula. Nominations for First Deputy Secretary General, Nomvula Mokonyane and Tina Jomat Peterson. Nominations for Second Secretary General, Maropene Ramokopa, as well as Ronalda Nalumango. And nominations for Treasurer, Pejani Chauke, Pule Mabe, Mzwandile Masina, and Gwen Ramokopa. It was an electric evening, or night rather, well into the early hours of this morning. But let's get into the discussion for this morning on Media and Society. What role did the media play, particularly in the road to Nasrec? And for that discussion, I am joined here by Dr. Ronesh Doraj, who is SABC News Research Editor. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Good morning, Naledi. Always a pleasure being with you.
Always a pleasure having you on the show. Also, we have Babalo Lepaka, who is SABC Digital News Producer. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks to yourself, Naledi.
Good.
A bit tired.
A bit tired, and understandably, because it has been ongoing and the work doesn't stop. I think on the very first day, Zizi Kodwa essentially said to journalists, jokingly, you know you're going to be here for a long time, right? Well into the early hours of the morning. And it certainly happened last night. I think before we even get into the road to Nasrec, the ease of working at this national conference for media, Ranesh?
I think it has been much better than previous conferences. The last time we was in 2017. Security was a bit tight, but I think just before that, if you look back at the 2012 national conference that was in Bloemfontein, where the ANC celebrated 100 years, their centenary, I think security was much tighter back then. Journalists weren't allowed to move very freely around the precinct. We weren't allowed to intermingle and mingle with the delegates. Obviously, this is also happening here as well, happened back in 2017, but obviously there's a reason behind it, because the ANC wants to control the kind of information that's getting leaked out to journalists and to media houses, because media houses, they're very strategic. They've got their networks. They know how to interact with certain elements of the ANC delegations here, and those leaks. So the ANC is being very proactive. They want to manage that process. Like we saw a couple of days ago, a couple of NEC members were actually congregating outside the Nasrec venue, speaking to the media on the sidelines. And then when the media briefing was held yesterday with Pule Mabe, the ANC national spokesperson, he said, that's absolutely fine. We allow freedom of speech, freedom of expression within the party, as long as it's robust engagement. So he's kind of defended it. That's a bit of a contradiction, because in the past they said NEC members, media, you're not allowed to speak to them. NEC members are complaining that, we media, we ambushing them. And a very good example is the SABC's own senior political reporter, Samkela Maseko, the very famous interview with Nomvula Mokonyane. I think it was an NEC ANC meeting right here at Nasrec. She was on the second floor on the balcony, and he's screaming out to her saying that, give us your opinion, what's going on, give us more information. So I think the ANC is doing well. I think this time around it's a bit more relaxed. But let's see, we've got 2 more days, so hopefully it gets a bit better.
Yeah, there's an expectation that today is certainly going to be a heated day as we start to look at what happens with those nominations for the top 7. But there also has been the aspect of the digital news, right? A lot of the information being inseminated or shared, rather, by the party on that front?
Yes, there has been certainly a lot of information that has been shared, but I think in terms of us as journalists trying to get information from delegates, that has been very difficult for us because the ANC has not really allowed us to have robust conversations with the delegates, and I guess they are trying to control the narrative because delegates are very disgruntled from all their different regions, so having to speak to journalists might be a bit of a problem for them. We saw delegates walking out yesterday from plenary, some of them chanting "Akabuyi, Akabuyi,"
He's not coming back.
So there's certain conversations that are taking place from the delegates. So I think in terms of having discussions with delegates, it would be nice if we were allowed as media to have those conversations. But I guess we'll see. We still have 2 more days to go, so we'll have a look.
Let's talk about the road to Nasrec. I think one of the big talking points, certainly over the past few weeks, has without a doubt been Palapala, Section 89. As soon as that report was released by that independent panel, that day was quite a day, wasn't it? The panel released the report in the morning. By the evening, it was released to the public, and we were all able to see it. I think immediately the sentiment the very next day was, is Ramaphosa going to step down? And a few days later, what you had then from the party was the sense that this idea that Ramaphosa could possibly stand down or step aside is hype that is coming particularly from the media. I mean, do you remember that moment?
I absolutely do, and I think before that big moment actually happened, before the actual release of that Palapala report, I think Cyril Ramaphosa and his people from the presidency, what they did was, in a very proactive way, they kind of knew what was going to come, so they managed that process. So what did they do? They released President Cyril Ramaphosa's documents, his submissions to that Section 89 panel, and I think he wanted to proactively manage the possible and obviously the negative sentiment that followed the actual release of that report. If I remember correctly, the report was released somewhere around 7:30, around thereabouts, and then obviously all that negative sentiment just came in, from every possible direction, and then by the morning, there were calls, Ramaphosa, you have to step aside. The report was around 84 pages long. Obviously, as the media, we needed to understand what was contained in that report, what were the charges. We needed to understand, because most of us being journalists, researchers, we're not qualified in terms of the law, so we don't know how to read legal jargon, so to speak. So we had to understand, we had to get commentary from legal analysts, legal commentators, to make more sense of what the report actually means and how does it impact the sitting South African president. Obviously, he's the ANC president as well. And then by Thursday evening, we saw that lots of conversations were happening with President Cyril Ramaphosa's inner circle. They told him, no, don't resign, just take a few steps back, let the mood calm down, and then make a decision. And then obviously what followed was the ANC called an emergency NEC meeting. We heard lots of conversations that happened in the meeting. People were shut down. There was a long list of 26 or 27 people. They wanted to comment about the situation, but obviously, accusing fingers were pointed towards the ANC national chairperson, Gwede Mantashe, and that's the reason we saw the developments in the National Assembly when Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and 4 others actually stood up and voted for that impeachment process to actually go ahead. They voted for the adoption of that report, but obviously we saw that report, was not adopted. 214, I think it was 58% to 41, somewhere thereabouts. Yeah, so that was the follow through of that entire process.
Yeah, I mean, it was really quite something to see, wasn't it? And then the social media response. I mean, those conversations went on, and you can share some of that. But it was just days ago, really, just a few days ago, when Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, having spoken to media and saying that she is available, she's willing to stand if she is called to stand for leadership of the party. she tweeted it. She tweeted as much as well.
Over 1,000 retweets, over 10,000 likes, and yesterday she didn't avail herself. She declined. So that was a shock for a lot of people on social media. And people were asking themselves, what are the conversations that are happening in the closed sessions of the ANC? So there's a lot of conversation about that. There's a lot of speculation that maybe the party is trying to unify itself, because we have seen instances where the party is very divided. So people on social media are basically questioning why Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma sent out that tweet. And then last night she said no. Well, rather early this morning she said no, I'm not availing myself for this position. So a lot of conversation around that.
And I want to sit with social media a little bit as well, because just even at the conference itself, there's been so many discussions happening on the sidelines, right? Let's talk a little bit about that. Tweets particularly that stand out for me were from some of the opposition leaders, right? Bongani Baloyi essentially saying 500 police officers deployed to Nasrec when El Dorado Park needs some of those resources. Let's talk about what we've heard, particularly from some of the opposition leaders on social media.
Okay, so essentially there's political leaders like Julius Malema, who's the leader of the EFF.
We expected him to be tweeting quite a bit.
He hasn't really been tweeting a lot. I went through his timeline this morning. He hasn't really been tweeting a lot. However, there is one particular tweet that he retweeted, and it is coming through from a user saying that clever blacks need to get used to calling Ramaphosa former president because his time is up. So Julius Malema retweeted that particular tweet.
And when was this?
This was about 2 or 3 days ago, and Julius Malema retweeted that tweet. But in terms of the actual happenings of the conference, he hasn't been really active. We also get someone like the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, a lot of conversations around load shedding. And he's basically saying that the ANC is constantly going on about load shedding and how it's affecting the economy, but the DA is making active steps towards ensuring that we tackle load shedding, like the work that they're doing in the Western Cape with independent power producers, with solar energy. And then there was a particular tweet also that I posted during President Cyril Ramaphosa's opening address. And he basically said load shedding is affecting the economy. And people on social media were like, really? When did you realize this? When did you make this sudden realization? What a surprise!
Right.
You know, so those are some of the conversations that are happening. I think people are tired of hearing about load shedding.
Yeah.
They need active solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to NDZ for a moment, because it was a big tweet. I mean, you talked about the numbers, the retweets and the shares, so many. And it was a big moment. She tweeted, call me and I'm available to lead. Last night nominated, and she turned it down. Why do you think that happened?
I think it's very strategic, and remember, it's also politics. You know, from my perspective as a researcher, if you look at all the numbers and the number crunching, obviously they eyeing the big prize. The big prize is the office of the president, ANC president. They possibly want to unseat the sitting ANC president, Cyril Ramaphosa. In the initial nomination process, Cyril Ramaphosa got the backing of 8 provinces and 2 of the leagues. That's the Women's League and the Veterans League. He lost out to Zweli Mkhize. Zweli Mkhize got the other one, the biggest delegation here, KZN. Close to 19% of the delegation KZN here, and obviously the Youth League has supported him. So had Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma or a person like Lindiwe Sisulu, for example, had thrown their hat into that ring, that could have possibly taken away votes from Dr. Zweli Mkhize. So what they've done is they say, we'll take a step back. We've got somebody formidable who's got a nice reputation, very good PR behind his name, former premier, former chairperson of KZN, the biggest delegation here, KZN as well. So let's throw our support behind him. He's our only hope to possibly take on the president and maybe win this election. And for this election, you need 3 of the biggest provinces. We saw the revised numbers yesterday, September 2022. The Electoral Committee released the initial numbers. Obviously, certain of the provinces were higher, certain of the provinces were lower. But after yesterday's release of the credentials, the adopted credentials, we saw Limpopo going down significantly, almost 4%. But the big provinces you need, Eastern Cape. Eastern Cape's numbers were reduced as well. Limpopo's numbers went significantly down, about 4%. KZN, surprisingly, although not much, their numbers increased. I think it was around 18 point something percent.
They're quite a big contingent as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, and KZN's always been a huge not kingmaker, but the biggest delegation from 2007 onward from Polokwane. And then 2012, they had a sizable number. And remember, these numbers are actually based on ANC membership in the provinces. And back in 2012, between 2007 and 2012, under the leadership of ANC President Jacob Zuma, the party actually increased the membership numbers by a whopping 300,000 between 2007 and 2017. By the time Jacob Zuma, obviously his 2 terms were up, so the party increased their membership to around 1 million. So in 2012, when Zuma was re-elected, he had a huge majority. 75% of people voted for him. Delegates voted for him. So he had a absolutely commanding lead. Obviously, the other person was Kgalema Motlanthe. But KZN in that election comprised 21% of all the voting delegates. So what I'm saying is, you need those 3 provinces: Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and KwaZulu-Natal. If you got those 3 in the bag, you may well just close shop and say the election's over.
Eastern Cape, Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal.
And obviously, you need 1 or 2 of the smaller provinces. Yeah.
I mean, I think Limpopo, certainly we might know where that's leading. KwaZulu-Natal, certainly, we know where that's. The interesting one is going to be what the Eastern Cape certainly does. So let's talk a little bit about some of the disruptions that we saw. I mean, it's been a colorful conference. The president takes the stage on day 1 of the conference, and he takes the podium to deliver his political report. And just as he gets into it, the grand entrance of Nxamalala, former president of the party, Jacob Zuma, with a crowd that's singing as well, disrupting the president, the current president of the party as he speaks. Big discussions on social media, right?
It was a huge discussion.
Yeah.
At some point before Jacob Zuma walked in, Gwede Mantashe was trying to address delegates, and so many delegates were saying to him, Gwede rest, And then as Jacob Zuma walked in, I think the attention was just completely focused from the front of the stage to when he was doing his grand entrance. And it's funny because a lot of the delegates were saying, no, we need young leaders. And then Jacob Zuma walks in, and then there's, pandemonium. So the conversations on social media have been quite interesting, but a lot of people on social media are also calling for, a younger leadership of the ANC. I mean, we saw during the policy conference, there was a picture that was actually circulating. There was a woman who was holding her phone, and she took like a selfie.
This was during the policy conference?
Yes, this was during the policy conference in July. She took a selfie, and basically you could see that it is old people. People on social media were saying, but no, guys, we need a younger leadership, So those are some of the conversations that are happening on social media, people calling for a younger and more vibrant ANC.
But what I found particularly interesting about the social media discussion in this country, though, has been, especially where the factional discussions happen, is that it seems that the RET-leaning faction has quite a big presence on social media.
They do have a big presence on social media, and like I said, it is evident through the different discussions. People on social media are calling for more reforms. People on social media are calling for a more active leadership that doesn't just talk, but actually delivers upon what it is that they are talking about.
There was a moment on Friday as the president delivered his political report where he said something very powerful. And I think this was able to garner quite a warm feeling in the room when he talked about how disunity in the party is not coming from the members of the party, but rather the leadership of the party. And it was something that Pule Mabe also reiterated in his press briefing yesterday, right? Talking about disunity and even going as far as to say that when the leaders of the party are on the stage and speaking, and media has been allowed into plenary, they would prefer that media doesn't look at the crowd, saying that once the cameras are facing the crowd, it rouses the room because they have a camera on them and attention is off what is being discussed on stage. Was that a fair statement? Essentially, almost making it sound as if the media itself may very well be bringing some of the disruption into the room, and does that feed into some of those factional, I suppose, cracks?
I think that's a terribly unfair statement to come from the ANC, because the ANC has always said this. You know, if you look back at service delivery process, you know, the SABC has come under intense scrutiny about the service delivery process. And at some point in time, the media, not only the SABC, the media was accused of actually stoking the service delivery process. Why? Because when people who are protesting on the roads, putting up barricades, when cameras are focused on them, when journalists are focused on them, when cell phones recording them, doing what they're doing, suddenly people are more animated. So I think that also goes back to that point that the ANC is trying to do. I think they're trying to control the message again, because the ANC is a very complex organization. It's a huge organization. So how do you manage all the negativity, all the negative messaging around the party? So the ANC has to do certain things. And I think it comes from that kind of place where they're trying to control the messaging around the party, a party that's 110 years old. And just going back to what happened on Friday, the political report of President Cyril Ramaphosa, I think obviously the session started very late, but didn't we all need that excitement? Didn't we all need that energy? And suddenly everyone came alive. But I think the important part of what President Jacob Zuma did, I think was a form of disrespect, firstly. It's also political intimidation, because you've got a sitting ANC president who just started speaking 3 or 4 minutes into his speech, and suddenly we get this huge round of applause and cheers. Everybody's focused on Jacob Zuma instead of the sitting ANC president. And also, remember, what Cyril Ramaphosa spoke about, the leadership, the disunity in the leadership. This takes me back to August 2020, where Cyril Ramaphosa addressed a letter, a personal letter to the branch membership of the ANC, all the membership around 1 million people. He says the ANC stands accused as accused number 1. If you guys cannot reform, the party is going to go down. If you're here just to make money for positions, political bankruptcy, you need to leave the party now. Immediately a day after, what happens? Former ANC President Jacob Zuma says, as a sitting ANC president, you should not have said that. You need to hang your head in shame. It's only a few cadres of the movement who are actually bringing disrepute to the ANC. And then obviously this tussle between Ramaphosa and Zuma, I think I've counted so far, Zuma has attacked Cyril Ramaphosa no less than 6 times. He even said, your president is guilty of corruption. Your president is a former CIA agent. Your president is a spy. Your president is actually guilty of treason. So all these things. And then obviously what happened, I think it was 1 or 2 days ago, we saw those legal papers being served on Ramaphosa. Private
prosecution,
Private prosecution. So I think it's going to get a little more ugly as we close conference in the next 2 days.
What did you make, quickly, as we speak on the issue of the private? Okay, we'll get into that, actually. Let's take a short break, because there's so much more to talk about. And perhaps what we should do is, when we come back, just talk a little bit about what we know about the particular the nominations for those that are in the top 7. We'll continue that conversation, of course, with some of our political analysts. Thank you so much for your time, though. We really do appreciate it. Dr. Rinesh Daraj, who is SABC News Research Editor, as well as Babelo Lephaga, SABC Digital News Producer as well. Stay with the Media and Society. We're back in a moment. Welcome back to Media and Society. We're coming to you live from Nasrec in Johannesburg as we bring you day 3 of the 55th National Conference of the African National Congress. Last night, the party up until about 2:30 in the morning, bringing to us, or rather really finally putting together that list of nominations for the 7 positions of what is now the top 7, after they've added that position of the 2nd Deputy Secretary General. But this morning on Media and Society, we're talking about the role that the media played in the run-up to this national conference. And to take that discussion further, I am joined now by Professor Lesiba Defo, political analyst, as well as Mr. Angelo Fick, as well, political analyst. Good morning to you, and welcome to Media and Society. I think before we get anywhere and we start getting into what it's looked like for the media in the run-up to the elective conference, talk to me about, having observed, particularly here in the media village, if you've seen media freedom, particularly for some of the practitioners here. Angelo?
Yes, I think people have been able to ask questions, even though the responses from Mr. Mabe from the floor may not always have been as they could have been. My sense is that there continues to be a very strange understanding between the role of media in a democratic society and the governing party's desire to control the flow of information and the kind of information that can be put out, and then the way in which technology has shifted just exactly how much of that control you can still have.
Prof?
Yeah, look, I've been around for a while now, and I looked at the briefings that we were invited to, and I had a sense that we are a little bit disrespected, because it was like we are delinquents that must just be kept busy as they are struggling to sort themselves out. And my way, all he did was almost entertaining us, just while away in time. But it was interesting to that extent, because clearly there was nothing to say except just to keep us busy, like delinquent kids who must be managed. That said, I would say I just appreciate the extent of excitement and interest from the media in the processes of the ANC. And if they were to conduct themselves to the extent that is admirable, that could go out to sell them. But they have a tendency of scoring own goals. But I think the media is out there for them to cover as much as they would love it to cover them. But at the same time, and media freedom in my country, at times, remember, this is a contested space,
yes,
as it is called the fourth estate, right? Not for the sake of it. It's a contested space. It will continue to be like that. But the media must be alive to that competition, to that contest. And the politics and the politicians must also appreciate the role the media must play. They have a tendency to say, look, you don't do it as we should, you are almost anti-government. And when they begin to fight among themselves, they turn back to the same media for cover and protection.
There was a moment in the press briefing yesterday that I'm hoping we can replay. I'm not sure if the studio is able to play that for us. Bule Mabe addressing the media and talking about the role that the media is playing in also contributing to disruptions inside plenary. Let's see if we can play that clip for you. Okay, we don't have it at the moment as we try and find it for you, but it was an interesting moment because essentially what you had was national spokesperson of the party, and I discussed this earlier with my colleagues, saying to the media in a press briefing that when the media turns its cameras towards the delegates want to rise up and start singing because they're getting that attention, and that disrupts proceedings. I mean, was that a fair statement, do you think?
It's a reflection of what happened, but whether or not that's a critique, I'm not so sure. I mean, Guy Debord talks about the society of the spectacle in the 70s, and, you know, we all live in a world in which the visibility of our own beings is constant, and it is with us. We're all aware of cameras all the time. We're no longer needing to go into a television studio to be filmed. It's handheld devices. Small children have learnt this. And so the way in which delegates have been responding echoes something of what Mr. Mabe himself was doing. In talking to the media in that deputy school principal way, he was actually talking to the delegates through the media. And so this performativity of the delegates at the conference, it used to be that they would perform only for one another. They're now performing also for the people who aren't inside and for the people at home, and they're aware of it.
Unpack that for me, because what you just said is actually quite big there. That he was speaking to delegates through the media and not to the media or to the public.
Absolutely, because I don't recall these massive stories of drunken journalists and journalists misbehaving in all sorts of ways. So in characterizing that first speech on that first day and saying, these are the rules of conference and you have a duty to behave in particular ways, he was really speaking to the delegates because they knew, they had anticipated, their reports have told them that there would be discipline, because that says in the report this is a challenge in the party, and that people would not necessarily behave as they wanted to. And they themselves have contributed to this as the officials and as the party, because senior people in the party have been using the media to perform for one another their campaigns and their views.
You disagree, Prof?
No, I don't disagree with him. I disagree with Mabe, because call it a storm in a teacup. Supposing you were to focus on the leadership on the table and not cover the the audience. He was still going to be faltered.
Yes.
And when they play the politics of numbers, they are more interested in the numbers of the people rather than what they are saying. So now how do you get the balance?
Right. I want to talk a little bit about, using the media to get their points across. And I mean, we've seen some spectacular moments in the run-up to where we are right now in this conference, where certainly there has been, that dangling of the carrot for the media. One moment, I think, has been when, we all found out that the suspended SG was outside Nasrec, and obviously the media wanting to go and hear why he's outside. Is he going to come inside? I mean, what do you make of those moments and some of the standout ones for you of where you've seen that dangling of the carrot between the party and the media, Prof?
Yes, look, it is said that you are not, human beings are not like the tap of water. You close when you please and you shut it when you please. Right? It is expedient that you want to project him out there. We kicked him out, so the media must go and cover him. And when it pleases you, they mustn't go. They must do it in a certain way. Act according to that principle that you can. At the same time, wish it to become a universal law. Right? It must not be out of expediency, because they want to control and not to control the media at the same time. He was telling me something very nice yesterday that, we like the media, we give you all the opportunities, we accredit even the people we don't want to accredit, like community radios, Tax University. The students were there yesterday. I was sitting with them. I felt good. It is to their credit, but it's also the empowerment of the community radios, especially the youth, especially the students.
I must say,
let's do it together.
Yeah, I must say, Prof, I was quite impressed by some of the young journalists in some of those media houses, just the young talent that's coming up. Let's take a few steps back. Let's go back a few weeks. Section 89 report comes out. That evening, we all have access to it. We're all frantically reading it so that we know what to talk about in the morning. In the morning, there are calls from various leaders within the party and also outside of the party saying, well, now it's time for President Cyril Ramaphosa to step aside. A few days later, we're hearing that no, those calls are unfounded and that the media blew that conversation out of proportion. What do you make of that?
I think there are always going to be contestations for a party of government that has constructed a constitutional democracy in which the role of the media as a social institution is constructed in that constitution and its vision in relation to how media was used by apartheid and colonial South Africa as a propaganda tool. But the people in the liberation movement who become the people who populate the government of post-apartheid South Africa also had a very curious understanding of media as a tool. Let's think of radio freedom, of the way in which under Oliver Tambo the ANC thought of the media as a conduit to get their message across, to now understand that the media isn't necessarily just a conduit in which we parrot what we're told as practitioners, as journalists. And that tension has remained with us 28 years later. I mean, the public broadcasters compromise in the Zuma administration, trying to turn it into a state broadcaster, the critiques of the way in which the Mbeki administration constantly put pressure on the public broadcaster during his administration. This is, I think, an issue that in a post-independence, post-colonial Africa has always been a struggle. But in South Africa, that is compromised and complicated by the arrival of corporate media in a neoliberal space, in which there are people with interests of the corporate kind doing business with government, trying to use private corporate media outlets to also deal with influencing the way in which they'll get contracts for businesses elsewhere in the stable that owns the media corporation. So this is not, I think, easy for the ANC to deal with, because they're steeped in their thoughts, habits and processes in a state broadcast propaganda model. And at the same time, they want to control what they call the narrative, and I'm not sure what that is, while the media themselves are, competing with social media. And we sit with, among other things, Neil Postman's thesis of amusing ourselves to death, where everything is spectacle, everything is in the same way consumed, whether it's drama, comedy, or substantial matters of political import.
Yeah, we had a discussion earlier with my colleagues about how leaders of the party have used social media as well. Hundreds, nearly thousands of retweets of Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma when she said, nominate me, call me and I'm available to lead. Last night, she pulls away. I mean, that was really quite a moment, wasn't it? I mean, your thoughts on when that happened last night and you went back to that tweet, what were you thinking?
I was sitting there and watching that, and it was interesting. It's always a pleasure, by the way, to listen to Angelo. I learn a lot also, and I'm a lifelong student because he is in the space. He has been in the space. And I hope that those who are listening can pick up as much as I'm picking up from him.
I am too, yes.
Because, look, it's a contested space, not only in South Africa. The relationship between the media and the state, the relationship between the state and the judiciary. And we must always seek a balance that is in the interest of the state, in the interest of the nation, than constituent part of the state. But let's go to Madam Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I understood exactly the play she was game, the game she was playing, and I think I've been around. I understand very well. They tried very hard to campaign and to conduct their campaign in such a way that one of the three would come as strong as possible. But they realized, as some of us said, that even the three of them combined, it was not going to be easy to bring down the buffalo. So yesterday morning, there were a lot of wrangling, compromises, give and take, and so on. And they reached some sort of agreement that let's rally behind Dr. Zweli Mkhize, lest we divide our vote, lest we weaken our bloc. And that's why she said no, without going further to say, by the way, I'm saying no in favor of Zweli. And then again, Madam Sisulu, right, opting now to go far lower the ladder for the treasurer position, just to remain in the top 6.
Now top 7. Now top 7. And I want to
top 7.
Now the top 7. Let's take a short break. When we come back, let's look at those nominations, or those nominees for the top 7. What we know about them. Did the media inform us enough about who these top contenders are? Certainly a lot of surprises, I think, as well in that list. We'll do that in a moment. Stay with us.
With over 4,000 delegates in attendance, rubber stamping policies, and the election of new national leadership. Join SABC News from the 16th to the 20th of December for a comprehensive coverage of the ruling party's national conference at Nasrec in Johannesburg. SABC News, independent, impartial.
This is the SABC News offices in Cape Town. This is where we bring your stories so that you may have a voice. Come, follow us inside.
So Mariska, the story went very well yesterday.
Good.
How are we taking it further today?
I've spoken to a few people who've agreed to be interviewed, so I think we can get going.
All right, let's get on it.
Great stuff.
Amanda has not focused means like.
Hey, Tandy. Hey, Vanessa. Hi there, Mariska.
By the way, Vanessa, why are you on deadline, you know?
Tandy, I actually have my script right here. I'm ready to unpackage. Let me do that right away.
Second Chetty, SABC News, George.
And this is where we put it all together to bring you the news. Your SABC, independent, impartial.
Welcome back. You're watching Media and Society as we bring you live coverage from the 55th National Conference of the ANC. It is day 3, and I am in conversation with Professor Lisiba Defo as well as Angelo Fick as we analyze the role of the media in the run-up to the elective conference, or national conference as it is officially called. Last night, we woke up this morning rather with the nominees for the top 7, no longer top 6, because the position of a second Deputy Secretary General has been added now onto that very powerful part, leadership of the African National Congress. I think, Prof, I want to start with you, right? And we chatted about this as well during the break. Just before we even get to the role of the media in looking at some of these nominees, standouts for you when we look at that list. You said the Treasurer General nominee seems to be quite bulky.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
Of all the 6 slots, the one that has more people is the one that has to do with money. All of the other ones, two. But when we get there, 4 people, and there is one, I think, I don't know why, but that's fine. Let me leave others to talk about that and to think as they please about it. But there's one who's misplaced there. I think it's Gwen Ramokop.
At Treasurer General?
Yes. I thought she should have gone up, even up to the Deputy Presidency. I think she has the wherewithal. But unfortunately, the society in which I live, in particular, the organization I know, it ought to have at least elevated. I would put her up there, even at the level of a deputy president.
She seemed quite optimistic last night, though, as we watched some of those proceedings. The nominations for Treasurer, Pejane Chaukepule, Mabem Zwandile Masina, and Gwen Ramokgopa. What do you make of that, Ajay?
No, before he comes in, I have no doubt she would get that.
Yes.
But it's a far lower position as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, you're confident that she could get it?
You know, I put 10 cents on that one. Yeah, she would get it.
Okay. We'll make 10 cents, let's see.
In this economy, I also wouldn't put more than 10 cents in a bet. But of those 4 nominees, I think we tend to focus so much on the personalities. The issue is, whoever the person is who inherits it is not inheriting a full kitty. Let's not forget this is an organization that, despite all of the glossy pamphlets and branded notebooks and pens that were handed out here the last few days, had its own employees, picketed at its national policy conference. It has concerns about the party funding formula and wants to change that legislation because it is finding it difficult to raise money. So the Treasurer General is going to have to manage, 1, lower sources of income, 2, manage the outflow of costs in a party that has grown massively and has a huge infrastructure at Luthuli House and other forms of expenses, and is sitting with financial scandals in both of its presidential candidates' backyard. So this is not going to be an easy ticket to inherit, and whoever gets it is going to have to be somebody who is going to do what previous leaders of the ANC, that we can only go back to the 50s, 60s and 70s did, which was to both manage inflow of money and outflow of money to keep the organization stable for as long as it did. Otherwise, 2024 is the last stand, and I don't think the party that started in 1912 wants to end in 2030.
I want to move towards wrapping it up because we're out of time, but I really just want to take one more analysis of how the media is done in the run-up to the conference. I wonder if during the conference and prior to it, in your view, and I'll start with you, Prof, that the media has asked enough questions around policy direction. I mean, there was supposed to be a massive discussion around important amendments to the constitution of the ANC at this conference as well, or has the media focused too much on the personalities?
Well, yeah, that's a fact. That's a given. Maybe we might even want to waste time on it. That's a given. Focus is more on the personalities, on the individuals, right, rather than on policy matters. But that's a question I'm more interested in than anything else. With all greatest of respect, I blame those who nominate the delegates to come here. I'm looking at the men and women who are here, and I say, do they understand the word policy, what it means? Can they read one page and tell me exactly what it means? What is the motive of those who send them here when they know they can't even understand one page of that because they want to send them there as folding fodder, as voting cattle? And shame on those who send them here knowing that they are only here to vote. Yet at the same time, they must determine the fate of the country. They must determine the fate of the 60 million people there. Can we do better? And that's where I'm saying, if we change the Electoral Act, then the right men and women will raise their hands, and if they don't, we'll go and take them out of the classroom from the pulpit and say, we want you to go and lead us. And they will rise and do a good job.
Sure. Prof, strong words. Strong words. Do you agree, Angela?
Well, I think also in addition to that, we will have to learn new ways of storytelling. We're relying on telling stories about individuals and their particular flaws as if we're still doing Shakespearean plays. And so people are Julius Caesar. They're, well-meaning, but they have tragic flaws. And therefore they're good leaders despite the tragedy, and they will end badly, but the society will be better for it. And I think we need to have new stories and new ways of telling those stories, because the urgency of what is unfolding, not just in South Africa, but for the majority of people alive at the moment over the next 50 years, means that the ways in which we've told stories about politics must shift to get young people far more focused, because it's their survival that is at stake. People like me will be gone in the second half of the century, and they will inherit whatever the decisions are that are being made by the people populating the institutions that are being elected at this particular conference.
I think that's a wonderful call to action, particularly for the media. And Prof, I'd love a call to action for you as well, because we try as much as possible on this show to make it about the media and the role that we can play to improve the work that we do coming out of the discussions that we have. Your call to action to me and other media practitioners that are watching.
Look, to the extent possible, put national interest first. Because some of the people in the media are embedded, are pursuing party political agendas, and some of them are pursuing profit. And I understand that. But for me, the national flag and the constitution of the republic come first. I want profit. Yes, I do. Right? But it must not be subsumed and subservient to national interests. Other nations are doing it and they get it right. Even next door in Botswana, they are doing it. We tend to reference things with Europe. Even next door here, go to Tanzania, go to Botswana, they are getting it right. We can if we want to. But we are drifting in the wrong direction. And I hope the media, including the intellectuals, the commentators and other people, will begin to appreciate that. Let's pull together to save this country. We are on a precipice.
Yeah, I've noted all of it. And I hope that media practitioners have as well. Just lastly, before I let you go, what you're expecting today? I mean, and anything at all. I mean, are you expecting explosions? We talked a little bit earlier about how we certainly haven't seen the massive excitement that I think a lot of South Africans were expecting we'd see. Someone said at the beginning of the conference that we're expecting there to be a lot of hostility. We haven't really seen that, have we?
So after Friday, I kind of accepted that it's going to be a bit of a damp squib, and there may be moments of dramatic interest, but I'm not certain. My expectations are gone. I'm happy to get through the day and take my lead from what the ANC delivers. I no longer have expectations that they will deliver something that's called X or Y.
Okay.
For things having reached this stage, right, it is unfair to attribute it to one man. But allow me to say kudos to Gwede Mantashe.
Chairperson of the African National Congress, also standing once again for that position, and he's up against Stan Mathabatha and David Masondo. Well, we're going to keep you really updated on all things unfolding here at NASREC, but thank you so much for joining us here on Media and Society. But do stay with the channel. Thank you so much to my guests, Professor Lisiva Tefa as well as Angela Fick. Have yourselves a wonderful Sunday.